Good afternoon, Jeremy Saltan. Thank you for coming to Israel Realities.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So you made Aliyah how long ago?
I made Aliyah in 1995, so that's just about 30 years now.
Oh, 30 years. And where did you come from?
From Skokie, Illinois, a suburb just north of Chicago.
It's a Jewish area, right? There's a lot of Jews over there.
It's a very Jewish area. I don't know when people might be listening to this in the future, but if you're listening to it around Holocaust Remembrance Day, there's the great TV movie Skokie with Danny Kaye. I definitely suggest it.
Oh, yeah?
For those of age and probably remember, so there was the entire attempt by the neo-Nazis to march in Skokie. That was a big part of my upbringing, knowing exactly where I was growing up and the history there.
What's the history?
The short version, I really suggest watching the movie that was based of
Danny
course.
Kaye, it's called?
It's with Danny Kaye, who's usually a comedic actor. Here
Right.
he was in a dramatic role. So what happened was the neo-Nazis decided in the 70s to try to provoke the Jewish community, specifically Skokie, which at the time had a majority Jewish population, also had a very high concentration of Holocaust survivors. The idea of the neo-Nazis in Chicago was to go north to the place where there were Holocaust survivors and do a march with swastikas and everything that goes along with a Nazi march. And this ended up being something that the local government, the mayor of Skokie, was against. It ended up going to the Supreme Court. You had the entire story of the JDL inserting itself, coming down into Chicago, trying to prevent. And it was really a whole saga that dragged on for a very long time, meaning this attempt of the Nazis to march, there was the initial attempt, then after they were blocked, there was the court case. Again, then the court case is going up to the Supreme Court. The short version is that the Supreme Court said the Nazis could march, but the Nazis did not end up marching. And I guess you can go ahead and watch the movie to see exactly what happened there. Growing up in Skokie, where in my class, I have a lot of kids who don't have all four grandparents, who are in situations of growing up with being one and a half or second generation from the Holocaust, and being very fresh just a number of years after the attempt of the Nazis to march in Skokie. All of that was a very big part of the childhood that I went through.
It has resonance with today's situation. Freedom of speech is caught in this strange quandary of if you want to have freedom of speech, then you can't be woke, because the woke has so many restrictions. The leftists are saying they should be able to say whatever they want except what's politically incorrect, and anti-Semitism and hate speech is not politically incorrect. As long as you're hating Jews, if you're hating Muslims, that's politically incorrect. So it's a strange set of multiple standards.
Jews are used to that, unfortunately.
One of the points that what you said also brought up in my mind is that we think in a way that we were in a privileged position being 10 or 20 or 30 or whatever the number of years, depending on when we were born, away from the Holocaust. We were in the ghetto in Italy, and the date that they took away the Jews from the ghetto is my birthday, exactly 10 years before. And so we thought, oh, it's a privileged position. It's a strange thing. And during the early times of Israel, they didn't want to talk about it too much because they wanted to build the country and not be obsessed with the past. Now, we don't feel the privilege of having survived the Holocaust is somehow in a similar vein with October 7th. Like, we've lived through our Holocaust now. What we say on Passover about in every generation they try to kill us somehow seems real, which it didn't growing up. Maybe for you it did, Skokie, being around children of survivors or grandchildren of survivors. And what was the push to move to Israel?
Yeah, obviously the push came from my parents, but I just want to give you a little bit more background about that and why I also thought it was very important for me specifically. As we like to say, Baruch Hashem, my family was not really touched by that. I have very deep roots in Chicago. My grandfathers are buried there. 6 out of my 8 great-grandparents are buried there. I have great-grandparents that are buried in Chicago. I have a really deep connection there going back many decades, back through over a century. Having that on one hand, not being directly affected, and on the other hand, growing up and seeing how that affected other people around me and absorbing it, I'd say more in an objective way. gave me a very interesting perspective. And it was really my father, Zichrono Livracha, pushing for us to come to Israel. I had many conversations about what made him go in that direction. His feeling was, I want my kids to get a good Jewish education. I want to make sure that our descendants are Jewish. And he felt the best way to do that was in Israel. He grew up in Argentina, went through the process of being an immigrant, going to the United States, and still decided to make that move, knowing the ramifications and what that would mean for his children. A lot of people just jump in. They don't necessarily know what they're doing. And he was really a guy who knew exactly what he was doing, and yet he did it anyways.
How old were you when you came?
I was 11.
11. People speak about that kind of being close to a cutoff age. I know a few people who came exactly at that age, and they became highly accomplished. And I'm sure it's not a coincidence. And what's said, and not always true, of course, is that several years after that, it's even more difficult because people have stronger friendships and alliances with the country they're coming from. But we interviewed Ian. His kids came as late teenagers, and they also became highly accomplished. For you, was it a cold water experience?
Oh, it was a very difficult experience for me. I was coming from Skokie. I went to Jewish day school, Hill Torah, which I really credit for being able to give me that foundation. I'm going in thinking I know Hebrew, I know Jewish studies. My teachers for Hebrew were a Jewish agency that came to teach me, so I thought I knew what I was going into, but we made Aliyah to Bet Shemesh, and this is Bet Shemesh of 1995.
Right, very different.
There's no Ramat Bet Shemesh,
Right.
There's no water tower, there's no Aviv. Most of Scheinfeld has not yet been built up. It's very much, I'm making Aliyah to a Moroccan school. I'm the only oleh, right? I'm the only immigrant in the school. It's very predominantly Moroccan, which is a very big culture shock for me, coming from America, coming from Skokie, from suburbia. So it was a very rough landing. The way that it works, Israel as opposed to America, in America you have first grade to fifth grade, and then junior high is 6 to 8. Here, at least at the time, primary was first to 6, and then junior high was 7, 8. So basically I was coming in on the last year after everyone was already set up in terms of their cliques. And I'm coming in as the new guy, as the foreigner. The Hebrew I have is very proper, but not slang. And the mentality, coming from Chicago, talking about watching Michael Jordan play, you would think that would go a big way with a lot of Israelis. But for these Israelis who like soccer, or to them football, basketball just doesn't speak to them. And to them, they just want to know, do I like Beitar? Do I like Maccabi? That's really what the question was at the time. The first year was very hard. And again, as time went on, it got a little bit easier. If I would have made Aliyah a year later, I would have been able to take the Israeli high school exams, the oleh version, but because I came in that last year, I didn't qualify, so I had to do that as an Israeli. I have a lot of stories I can tell about that year. Maybe I'll just choose one. I think it was really maybe the first week, second week. There was a kid that was violent with me, was physical. He was able to get me down to the ground. I found myself with tea and iodine. I don't know why iodine, but they give you iodine.
For the scrapes and bruises and for calming.
I'm waiting for the principal, and the principal comes in. He's long retired. He looks at me and he says, "New kid, what's the deal?" I was thinking maybe you would do something to the kid that did something to me. He said, "No, it's your fault. It's your fault because you didn't fight back." And again, coming from America, this is not the type of experience that I really knew what to do with. Going back to Hill Torah, if I'm thinking about assistant associate principal Scott, that's minimum suspension, if anything. But here I'm being told to fight back. I don't really want to fight back, but I go back. I'm asking my parents what they think. They're like, if the principal says, that's what you got to do. So He comes back for me the next day, and it turns out that I'm not so bad of a fighter myself. And he ended up with a bit of a bloody nose. I was called back to the principal's office. So I figured I would be told I went too far. The principal just comes in, gives me a slap on the back, and he said, "We'll make an Israeli out of you yet." So again, when I'm talking about culture shock, that's the culture shock. A completely different reality. It's not even just mentality, it's a completely different reality. And of course, not all Israelis are like that. Anyone listening, don't use violence. That's not an answer. But the point that I was trying to make was making Aliyah in the mid-90s, to the place that I did when it was still considered a development town, not the city it is today. Israelis who've been here for a long time, they know what that is to be in a development town. It was just a very different experience from my childhood.
Yes, for sure. It reminds me of Elon Musk. He went to a summer camp where getting beat up and beating other people up was the main course of the summer camp. It also reminds me when my daughter, who's now 31, was in preschool, and there was another child who was threatening her with violence at the age of 5. We complained, and they called in a psychologist. We sat with the psychologist, and we said, "What are you going to do with the parents or with the child?" And she said, "No, we're here for you. Don't you know where you are? Don't you watch television?" It's ironic because I'm just listening to the book called Rise Up and Kill, or in other words, the biblical mandate that if someone's trying to kill you, you have an obligation to rise up first and kill them. I'm listening to this book and listening to, even during the times before we were so much in the negative eye of the world, the number of precautions we took to not be violent unnecessarily, to preserve human life, were crazy. People who were well known as organizing hundreds of murders, and because their daughter came on site, the possibility of killing them was called off. While violence and even bullying in some cases is a real phenomenon here for various ages, subcultures, as a country, we have this outstanding policy of not being overly violent and preserving civilian life. So then you came at 11, and also a little bit of the background. Where did Moroccans come from? What is it, 60% of the country is from Sephardi, meaning originally from Spain, and mostly via northern Africa. Like, where did they come off coming here? So you can, I think you probably know it better than I do. Like, they were kicked out, right? They were unceremoniously and also violently removed from their country, population transfer, you could say. They weren't told where to go, but they came here, and they were also not treated terribly well for the first many years. They were put in displaced persons camps. So now things are a lot better. Moroccans are integrated.
Oh, yeah. I think that, again, I'm talking about a time period of 30 years ago. But I also have a better understanding now of Moroccan Jewry. I visited Morocco. I was able to go to both holy sites, but also get a better understanding of those that are still there. I'll note that if we are looking at the amount of Jews that are still left in Arab countries, there still are some Jews who live in Morocco. I had the opportunity to go to shul there, get an Aliyah. And these shuls have been there for hundreds of years. And as you were saying, I also found this very interesting. For instance, I was in Fez, and the Andalusian Jews that came from Spain still have their own shul, the Berber tribe.
The mountain Jews.
They have their, right, so they have their own. And even if they're having trouble getting a minyan in both of them, they don't really like mixing. I just find that very interesting that even after hundreds of years, they still have that divide there. So obviously here I think it took time for the Moroccans themselves from both of those communities to merge into each other and then merge into the greater Sephardi population, and then after that merge generation afterwards into the rest of the Jewish population, which today a lot more.
Yeah. There's, at least I just heard what's going on in Syria now. This is like subpopulations fighting other subpopulations. The Alawites, who are like Druze, Christianized Muslim Shias, and the majority Sunnis who are allied with Muslim Brotherhood, and they're just going at it. So the Jews, even though we've had more than our share of external enemies, also have a sad and long history of targeting each other. Among the Hasidic groups, there's splits. Among the political groups, certainly there's enormous splits, what do they call the deep state. Unfortunately, we've been subject to that. There's a lot of biblical direction to say that, in fact, is the most important thing, is the unity of the Jews.
I really agree with you. It's paramount. I think that if we look, for instance, the time before the 7th, I think the fact that our enemies saw us divided gave them that extra incentive. Not that they need more incentive because they hate us, but I'm saying that gave them extra incentive. And I think that we're always stronger together. I think if you look at the time period Israel had after the 7th and the unity that you really had there, I thought that it was really remarkable. I think in terms of the challenges that we're looking towards, for the near future. But of course, even long term, we need to be together. And just as it might be difficult for different Hasidic groups to get along with each other and then get along with the Lithuanians and the Sephardim or whatever else, but if we don't work on this, if we don't find a way for all of us to get along and really just chart a path together forward, we're not in a very easy neighborhood, and we saw what could happen if we fall back to the divide that we had before the 7th.
I have in mind a strategy, and we mentioned that Tzvi Sinai, whose strategy is identifying the Palestinians as former Jews as if that's some sort of a key to a peace. But when we're talking about the splits among people who already identify as Jews, that doesn't seem quite right. Do you have any notions, or that, like what would you, if you had tremendous control and tremendous influence across a wide spectrum of people, do you have any guesses as to what you would do?
Yeah, I just look, for instance, in the army as a commander and having different Jews that are in different positions, of course also having Druze or whatever in the company, but being in a position where you see there are different people from different places, different backgrounds, the way to really get everyone together is to recognize the common denominator, explain what sacrifices or compromises they need to make and why it's so important. When you have the same uniform, so there's no division in terms of clothes, everyone's wearing the same thing, that breeds a certain amount of unity. But when you're looking at the actions and behavior that you have to take, when you have to go out for a mission, you can't say, oh, this guy voted Otzman, that guy voted Meretz, so I'm not going to put them on the same mission. Or this guy is religious and that guy's secular, I'm not going to go ahead and put them together. It's making sure that, number one, they understand what is needed. So going back to the question here, the common denominator of explaining that we're all together, we're all in this together. One of the things that I notice, especially when I talk to other soldiers, is that they feel the other person views them differently or is treating them differently. I think if you're able to show that we're on the same page, and a lot of times what you need here is leadership. You need to be able to sometimes deal with situations, whether it's between two groups or two people, put them in the same room, even if it's difficult, and create the circumstances necessary to come out together on the same page. I wish it was the same solution for each group or each person, but people are complicated. And if we're looking at the various groups within our Jewry, we're all complicated people, and different things bother certain groups that might not bother other groups. So what you need here is really a multi-level solution, and to do that, you're able to do that when you get representatives of everybody at the same table. The Army is a great place, but unfortunately, you don't have everyone within Jewry at the same table there. So I'm saying if we're looking at something that's going to be across all of Jewry, so we have to be able to have a table that has everybody and all topics on the table, because there's more than one or two or three topics here that are at hand.
I had heard somebody came up with a radical idea, which is less cultural. You know how it says that tears open the gates of heaven? And they have these things where people they have laughter yoga, where everybody's laughing together, and supposedly that generates. I thought maybe just to get everybody to cry together, find a way to induce a group cry, because it says that's like a call to God. And the orphan's tears and the widow's tears. Jumping over a little bit into religious thought, there are times when it says that if the Jews get together, even if they're less halachically adept, that's primary. And also, there's this other event where the Israelites had a big army, and God says, no, you have to get it down to a smaller army so that you don't...
Yes.
So, what the heck? Does that mean we should weaken ourselves? Reaching two strange suggestions. The idea of weakening ourselves to bring God into the picture, and the idea of bringing out the tears as a commonality. Anyways, you don't have to respond to that. We can go on.
There's a lot I can say about that, but I'm also happy to move on.
Yeah, let's move on. And maybe in a different situation we'll do that. You went to school here, and you went to the Army.
That's right.
Hopefully high school was a better experience after how you could fight.
Yeah, so I ended up having a high school's experience. I bounced around a little bit, but I was able to have, in the end, as an Israeli, Bagrut. I've ended up with 30 Yechidot, 30
How do you
units.
say Bagrut in English?
Yes, I was able to get 30 units. The minimum is 21. I think the maximum was maybe like 50. So I did pretty good. My average was not so bad either. I would probably just say I was a mediocre average student. And this is high school, not university. But I think it was because I was still going through the absorption process. I just remember those first report cards in 6th grade where, aside from English and maybe gym class, the highest I got was a 40. I'm getting like 23, 38.
Out of 100?
Out of 100,
Wow.
yes. And when my mother's, what's going on with the report card, they're like, we're grading him like an Israeli. So again, I had a very tough love approach to the beginning of my absorption process. So it took me some time to catch up. One of the things that I really credit to what helped me adapt is the youth group called Nesto, New English Speaking Teen Olim, which is a youth group run out of the Orthodox Union, the Israel Center in Jerusalem. And that really was able to give me a good framework to be in a place with other people that were just like me. And after spending time there, I continued as a counselor. And then after the Army, I actually went back and I worked there as an educational project director. I was eventually the assistant director of the program. I think in life, when you're given a tough card, it's very easy to just go ahead and say it's an excuse. I'm a person who always went ahead and searched to try to find what I could do to come out of it. For me, it was a frustrating experience that high school was. It could have been a lot worse.
By sympathy, having gone through difficult times, you're then in a position to help people who have gone through similar difficulties. I understand you dealt with, in your times as an advisor, we'll do a sequential thing a little bit later, maybe.
Sure.
It says, Ein mugdam v'meochar. There's no sequence to the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that means, like, the Bible is the model of the world, so this, whatever. You worked on children's rights. What kind of stuff was going on there, and what kind of stuff were you proposing?
During this Knesset term, I've had an advisory role in a lot of different positions. About a month ago, I accepted the position to be an advisor for the committee chairman of the Children's Rights Committee. Mm-hmm. The Children's Rights Committee is a special committee that encompasses all aspects of the child's life, meaning you're able to deal with issues that are both education and health, or also perhaps welfare. It gives you an opportunity to really tackle things on a multi-committee level. There have been a number of different pieces of legislation that have gone through the committee. And for me, as I said, I've only been there about a month now, but it's an honor to be able to go ahead and work on such important issues.
Can we bring Elon Musk, after he finishes with the United States, to come over here and redo it? I once met a guy from the Ministry of Education here, and I said, this is something that Trump's been trumpeting, that like America, we spend a lot per pupil, but the results are going down, not up. I asked him, what's the story? And he said, part of the problem is we have 4 education ministries. We have the highly religious, the somewhat religious, the national religious, the Arabs, and the non-religious. And so it gets tied up in bureaucracy.
There's a historical reason we have the system that we have. It goes back to the compromises Ben-Gurion had to make in order to establish this country. When it came to the Peel Commission, the ultra-Orthodox said, we're not going to agree to support the idea of a Jewish state under your leadership unless we get an independent education system. That was one of the demands they made on their end. There were 4 different demands. That was one of them. And also the religious Zionists who said, we're happy to have a state school, but we need a state religious school. It's to be a religious state school. So they also ended up with a separate situation. After the creation of the state, having a non-Jewish population that didn't agree to the regular state system, they also were given their own system. I don't think at this point you can really change that. You have to work with the system that you have today.
Although it would be an interesting thing to try to do. It would be almost impossible to integrate.
I don't see, frankly, a school with Haredim and Arabs. It's just not going to work.
Betzalel wants me to ask about what kind of projects or legislation are on the table about children's rights. And
right now, we're right before Purim. The focus is on that. You have the situation of costumes. You have the situation of all of the, firecrackers and fireworks and all these type of things. You have the added thing, especially after the 7th, of people who are PTSD and really can't deal with this
right.
type of stuff.
Explosions.
Especially if you're talking about the children in areas where they were not evacuated, the rockets and everything going on there, but also a lot of the parents of the children that are coming back from the war in Gaza, and those explosions really send them back, give them flashbacks. This is serious stuff. So we've worked a lot on terms of awareness. There's also a lot of things in terms of, like I said, just danger for the children itself. All of these firecracker, explosive, whatever, things that are going around, this is not a new thing. Every year we see there's unfortunately a large number of Israeli children who get injured from these. So we really took it upon ourselves this year to tackle that issue and do what we can. Obviously, in terms of costumes, you're dealing with dangerous costumes, considering the times we're in, but also costumes that are a danger to the kid in terms of being able to breathe.
PTSD is a serious thing. Even though we've only had a handful of serious sirens and missile attacks during this war, I still feel apprehensive at certain sounds that are in the frequency range of a siren. I'm like, is that going to turn into a siren? And it's ongoing, but it's not new. Like we had in 2000, when you were a teenager, we had all those attacks and bombs. One of my kids was about 6 years old at the time and found right outside our gate one shoe.
Wow.
And he was like, what is this? And we said, what do you think it is? He said, oh, maybe somebody lost a shoe in an explosion. Really? That's what's on your mind? They become inured to it on the one hand, and for people, I'm not sure what the stage is that people become oversensitive or more sensitive to that kind of trauma, but there is a stage. There came out a study that certain kinds of drugs, even recreational hallucinogenics, for certain kinds of people, I think it was MDMA, for the people who were in the Nova, it provided a sort of immunity, because it brought them to a different level, like a little bit like ketamine. What are they called? Disassociation. It gave them a sense of dissociation. But overall, in Israeli society, I think right in the mix, nobody's distant by more than half a degree from somebody who was killed. In our neighborhood, within half a mile, there were certainly 6 kids that died as soldiers or in the Nova Festival. So it's a very immediate experience. I've heard it said that the whole Israeli society is in PTSD.
Yeah, in a certain way they are.
Yeah. Jumping to another subject that you've worked on. I'm intimately familiar with this now because of a family situation. Foreign workers, they're dealing with people who have different kinds of trauma, usually I think not psychological trauma so much as physical trauma, either from disease or from accident or it could be from a terrorist event. Israel allows the import of basically a whole population of foreign workers because there were so many Palestinians who were working in the building institutions, and also because there were so many foreign workers who were traumatized and kidnapped during October 7th. So that's been also, I don't know if you've dealt with that as well.
Yeah, let's talk about foreign workers before and after October 7th. Yeah. Before October 7th, for the most part, you're looking at caretakers, agriculture. You're looking at a pretty small population, maybe about 80,000 foreign workers here in Israel. And then after the war, when the Palestinians are no longer coming into Israel, and you have this whole issue in terms of the Israeli workforce, most Western countries, they're built in a way where you have immigrants come in to do immigrant jobs. Here, just as my family came in, we didn't come in and then do immigrant jobs. We came in, Jews, we come in as hopefully as first-class citizens. I have a lot of respect for all Israelis, including Jews, who do those jobs. But the reality is, in terms of the numbers, that the great majority of people, both making Aliyah as well as those who are working in the Israeli workforce that live here, don't do those jobs. And we don't have the immigrants to come to do it. So we bring in the foreign workers to take that part of the market share, because without that, you really have the economy collapsing in a lot of different areas. So before the foreign workers, we had Palestinians, and we had hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million Palestinians that were working on all of these jobs. And then once that stopped, we've already doubled it. It's over 150,000 foreign workers. We're going to pass 300,000 by the end of the year. And we've gone into a lot of different markets. You mentioned the building market. There's also the restaurant market, the hotel market, the cleaning market. We noticed such things that you just don't connect. In hospitals, you have enough doctors, but you don't have enough cleaning staff to clean the surgery rooms, and then you're not able to perform as many surgeries because you just don't have not the highest level, but the lowest level person in the chain, because that used to be a Palestinian and they can't get in anymore. And again, it's for security reasons, and I support them, why we don't have Palestinians today working in these jobs. Being a part of that process, I think it's very important. But there are still a lot of people who don't understand, meaning they say, listen, I want only Jews in this country, even if these foreign workers are coming in for 3 years. They might marry someone, they might get someone pregnant. I don't want them. The cost of not bringing in these foreign workers is really, it's not in the billions, it's in the dozens of billions.
Whoa.
And if you're looking at the amount of Jews that have lost their businesses or are going to lose their businesses, because we're not bringing in these immigrant level people through the foreign workers, it's just not going to work. And I'll just say one last sentence on that. We've tried all these programs, including during the war, to incentivize Israeli labor for all of these things. In areas where we were able to do it through Israeli labor, we didn't bring in foreign workers. But in a majority of the sectors, it didn't even matter if we were paying them triple. We just ended up in a situation where the dishwashers are making more money than practically anybody within the restaurant business because we weren't bringing in foreign workers. These are stuff that we had to do something to change, else we're just going to see entire sectors completely collapse.
Right. Do they have guaranteed minimum wages?
We do have a guaranteed social package as well as minimum wage. We have also what's called an agra. We have a tariff that you have to pay when it comes to foreign workers. It's a very complicated system. Even for these businesses, it's more expensive than the Palestinian option. It's just they don't have the Palestinian option. And even with all of the tariffs and the minimum, these foreign workers are still making less money than they'd have to pay Israelis equivalent in order to have these jobs actually be taken.
So to distinguish between Palestinian Israelis who have Israeli citizenship.
Yeah, I don't really like that terminology, but yeah, there's
Israeli Arabs,
that
yeah,
some
it's
of them
better.
identify as Palestinian Arabs. I'm talking about the Palestinian population coming from Judea and Samaria or from the Gaza Strip. So from the Gaza Strip, it's now 0. From Judea and Samaria, you still have a few that have special status, but the great majority no longer work within Israel.
That means they've shot themselves not in the leg, but higher up. They really have victimized themselves, because that was almost without a doubt the main source of income for the majority of the population of the West Bank.
It's not just within Israel proper. If you're also looking at the Yeshuvim within Judea and Samaria, who some of them now are hiring, others aren't. It depends. It's on a case-by-case basis. I was talking with some people who they're like, I'm talking about like mayors and otherwise, they're like, look, we want to build Jewish homes. If we need Arabs to build Jewish homes, the ends justify the means. But in many other places, they're not coming in, because I'd say the Palestinian economy is so dependent on Israel, whether it's in Judea and Samaria or over the checkpoint in smaller Israel as opposed to greater Israel. You're in a position where you're really feeling the consequences here of October 7th.
So what we're reminded of by that is the conceptia that if we give them a comfortable home, that somehow they will have a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, which will replace desire to dominate and destroy Israel. And we found that in so many instances to be utterly baseless. It's clear that we were letting in 30,000 a day from Gaza to work in Israel at wages that were 10 times as high as the wages in Gaza. And we were letting in, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Arabs from the West Bank. And to all appearances, it hasn't. The fact that they've lost their avenue towards a bourgeois life, to a middle-class life, a whit, even a jot or a tittle of their willingness to and eagerness to destroy Jews and the Jewish state. So it's really not about economy. It's also really not about land or about nationality. It's about a desire to destroy the Jews and the Jewish state.
Sometimes you just have to listen to the enemy and take your enemy at face value and their word. And they're very clear about what they want to do to us. And maybe it's about time we actually take them seriously.
So 2 questions. Okay.
I'm happy to come back.
So we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much.
It was a pleasure to be on your platform and It was a great opportunity to speak with you, Neil. I look forward to doing it again. And of course, Bezalel, it's always great to see you as well. And I look forward to being able to resume our conversation in
Great.
part two.
Thanks. Thanks very much.